We hope you had a good lunch, and we are on the home stretch, the last part of the day now. We have one coffee break left in between. But yeah, we have Julia to talk about what happens when hackers are inside the building.
Mayhem.
So please give a round of applause.
Hi, to just continue the trend that Nina started, this is my second time talking at DKNOG, but my first time with a live audience, which should tell you exactly which year I was here. So, I work for a pen testing company, penetration testing. Worked for them since 2020. It's an interesting use case, so I thought I'd just give you a bit of a chat about what we do, because our network is weird. Right, so just in case anyone doesn't know, what is penetration testing? We basically come along and try and break into your network, building, website, app, whatever you're willing to pay us to do. We do various different things. Some of our tests are what we call black box, where we don't know what you're doing, what's in there. Some of them are white box tests, where we have access to all of your code as well. We do something called red teaming, where as a group we will pretend to be an adversary. So all speak with a Russian accent for a week. And we will try and penetrate your organization, usually with a defined goal. We have a lot of customers, which because of the nature of our organization, I can tell you none of them. What I can say is they include banks, they include hospitals, health insurance, government departments, and everything also down to tiny little sort of, specialist web stores that sell tennis products and things like that. But the other customer that we have is ourselves. Because we are a penetration testing company, when I set something up and I want a pen test, it's really easy to get. So whereas you lot have to negotiate funding and suppliers and all of that, I can just send an email across the office. So where do we start? Unfortunately, while we'd like everyone to be nice and fluffy and kind and generous, the reality is we all have a target on our back. Every single person. The question is, how big is your target and who is looking at it? And for that, we come down to an exercise called threat modeling. Who here has partaken in a threat modeling exercise? Okay, both of you, keep your hand up if you've redone that exercise since January the 20th. I like you. And you. Yeah. The world has changed in the last 2 months. We have to take that into account. So in our organization, this is the other thing. Threat modeling is not a short exercise. It's not something you do on a Thursday afternoon over a coffee with a few of you and get it home and done with. For us, it was a 2-hour session once a month for a year. We had the CISO, myself, and a cross-section of the most senior pen testers, and we went through. And then we do it again, regularly. And you have to update it because threats change. Technology changes. When it comes to threat modeling, the thing to remember, it's all about risk. And as many a drunk person has said whilst laying on the floor outside the pub, it was a calculated risk. Turns out I suck at maths. Humans are awful at calculating and understanding risk. Absolutely dreadful. There are things that people are incredibly terrified of, flying. And as a result, for example, of the 9/11 attacks, people didn't fly. And as a result of that, more people died in car crashes driving up and down the east coast of the US rather than flying in the year after. Because people don't understand risk. And there are hundreds of examples I could use, and every time I do the talk, I'll probably pick a different one. So, it is also worth noting that whilst I'm talking about this from companies, organizations' perspective, you also need to consider that we as individuals can benefit from threat modeling. There is a very good talk done by Danny. She did it at WICON, which is the Women in Cybersecurity Community Association annual event in the Netherlands. It's available on YouTube. I highly recommend it. So, a lot of organizations, the first thing they do is they go, well, we should install some antivirus software, some malware detection. And because the technology landscape is the dumpster fire it is, they go to Microsoft Defender. Who here uses Microsoft Defender? That's quite a few of you. So it's very good at detecting malware. For what it's designed for, I have minimal complaints. The problem is we actually have malware that we use intentionally. We have hacking tools that we use intentionally. We installed it on one of my colleagues' laptops. He had worked for us for 2 years at that point. We set it up, and we made the mistake that every time there is an alert in Defender, I get an email. I denial of serviced my inbox with 327 alerts in the space of 5 minutes. I run Outlook in a Windows VM. That machine was just unusable for the rest of the day. Just all of the pop-ups coming up. There is a way around this. Defender has the option to exclude a directory. And so we ask all of our pen testers to have a directory for their toys that they put them in. We also ask, use virtual machines. Virtual machines are great for compartmentalizing things. Though, we discovered an interesting bug last week. If you're using VMware Fusion, it shares a paste buffer. So if you copy an SQL injection, or cross-site scripting or something, inside your VM, Defender outside the VM will flag. This confused the hell out of us. Took us a while to work out what was going on. So what's my next slide? Right. If you study networking in a formal environment, or do a Cisco course, you will be told that there are 7 layers to the network, the standard OSI model. Then you get told, but in reality we do TCP/IP, so there's only 5 layers. But the reality is there are 10. So aside from the 7 that you all know, layer 8 is the meat sack sat at the computer. This has always been a problem. There's an acronym that's been in the jargon file since before some of you were born, which is PEBCAC. Problem exists between keyboard and chair. Layer 9 is the meat sack's boss. They are the ones that come along and go, well, I was playing golf with a supplier the other day, and I've signed a contract and we're using their software. Cool, what was their security audit like? Oh, what? And then number 10, the one that we've all become incredibly aware of recently, government. Whether that is a case of, say, some Tim Pot little island moored off Europe that says, hey, Apple, we want a backdoor into all of your storage systems. Or whether it's some civilized country in the Nordics who want to break end-to-end encryption. Sweden. There are lots of problems that we have that exist in layer 10. And unfortunately, whilst I would suggest that there are solutions, wikipedia.org/guillotine.html, generally speaking, we don't have much control there. But for the rest of the layers, we do. And I'm going to stick on this slide for a while. So when I said our network is weird, I really meant it. We have roughly 46 users. And for that number of users, I have 7 or 8, depending on how you count them, physical firewall router boxes. Because we do compartmentalization in a big way. And it starts right down on layer 1. Physically separating networks. And you think, you're going to be asking, bloody hell, she's paranoid. No, the question is not, am I paranoid? The question is, am I paranoid enough? So we start off with, does this need to be connected to a network? We have one system which lives in a box. Inside that box has 2 locks on it. That box then has 2 tamper-evident seals on it, and it's kept in a safe that only 4 people can access. Those 2 locks, 2 people have the key to one lock and 2 people have the key to the other lock. That is our root certificate authority. If you host your own CA, that is the level of paranoia you need. You have to have it offline. So, moving up into layer 2. Who here uses 802.1x authentication for their networks? Thank you to, 5 of you. I'm going to say no. So authenticating the actual physical layer is incredibly useful. So if you look up on the ceiling, you'll see that there are 2, at least from my perspective, 2 Unify Wi-Fi access points. Those are incredibly common at most organizations. They do no authentication. If I can get physical access to your building, obviously it doesn't work on the ceiling here because I'm not Dutch, I can't reach that tool. However, if you go to the toilet and look up, you'll notice that there is one that is much easier to reach. Somewhere dark, out the way, not many people watching, and there's no camera. If you can get physical access to that, you can plug in a Raspberry Pi. With a Raspberry Pi, it can dial out. Congratulations, you've backdoored the network. If you use things like 802.1x, you can authenticate who is on your network. People don't do it because people aren't paranoid enough. The other thing that a lot of people do with that is you've got your office, you've got Ethernet ports all the way around there. They all go back to the patch panel. They're all plugged into the router. Not the router, to the switch. Why? Yes, it makes it easier that someone can just plug in. But if you don't have that cable there, you can't have somebody come in and plug something in the office where it's relatively easy to get to. If they have to ask IT to get off their ass, walk down the other end of the building and actually patch the cable in, it's a lot harder an attack vector. Going up into the IP layer, one of the problems we have is a lot of our customers are behind content delivery networks. And what they're supposed to do is tell the customer, these are the IP addresses that we are testing from. Please can you whitelist them so that we don't flag any of your security alerts? That's what's supposed to happen. And it does, about 98% of the time. But the problem we were running into is one of the big content delivery networks is used by the company that we buy the groceries and the coffee for the office with. And every so often, a customer would screw up. And the reason we knew this was because we couldn't order lunch, which is a dangerous situation to be in. And the solution was we give each team of about 4 or 5 pentesters a pair of VPNs. One on this server, one on that server, because redundancy. So they go out on a specific IP address. So when we get blocked, we know at least which of the 3 or 4 it was that screwed up. Got slides here, haven't I? So those are the sort of paranoia things. The other one, who here actually uses your out-of-band network, IPMI, all of that sort of stuff on your switches and stuff? How many of you stick that behind a completely firewalled network? Okay, the fact that that wasn't the same set on both sides of the questions, that's a problem. Because IPMI, UPS, PDUs, they don't get updates to the firmware. You know, a PDU can have a life cycle of 10 or 20 years because it's not doing much, it's just switching power occasionally, and most of the time it doesn't even switch anything. And so it sits there, and it's running HTTP, it's running IPv4, and in a lot of organizations it's probably still got the default password, which on APC is APC, APC, and that's on a network. And suddenly you're starting to get access to that. And once you've got access to one thing, you can move sideways. And it's terrifying when you hear what some of my colleagues will do with that. So we have a meeting once a month where they basically show off their latest hacks, anonymized, obviously, because we can't tell the world what we're doing particularly much. But it's nice to be able to show off to your friends. And we did one, I think it was a red teaming attack on a hospital. And we had such comprehensive control. We set up a phishing site. We got a few people to sign up through it, give us their passwords. We got in, and it was like people in admin. And once we got on their machine, we could sniff the network. We could find some NTLM hashes that were going past. We grabbed them. We've got our own password cracking tool, which is a power nightmare when it's turned on. Don't be behind the rack when they power it up. It scares you. And from that, we were able to get full access right into the domain controller. And I was sat there, just as an admin, watching this talk. It's completely anonymized. And I had to walk up to my colleague and say, I'm being treated by this hospital and this hospital. Please tell me they weren't our customers. Fortunately, it wasn't. But that is the sort of example of the control that we get. Now, for an organization, most of your problems are at layer 8. Because we can do all of these things with compartmentalization. We can do stuff with firewalls. We can do stuff with authentication and all of that sort of stuff. But if you click that link that somebody just sent you, and you type in your username and password, all of the security is bypassed. Now, because we're a security company, we are a big target. And you've heard of phishing, but there is a variant of phishing called spear phishing, which is a directed attack. That's not just the, hi, you're a customer of such and such bank, your account's been blocked, please log in, that we all get. No, these are the dedicated, hi, I am CEO of company. Could you please contact me on WhatsApp? That's one of the common ones. Between updating a new member of staff, updating their LinkedIn and getting their first spear phishing email, how long do we think that takes? Anyone want to guess? Not quite that bad. Any other guesses? We've got 45 seconds. Price is Right rules.
10 minutes.
Oh, wow, you lot are actually more paranoid than me on this one. It's about 2 hours. Between 2 to 3 hours, we will get a spear phishing attack. To the point that on the first day, before they get their laptop, we have to brief new members of staff. The new pentesters are okay with that. But we have people that are less technical, sales, HR, office management, sysadmins. And so we have to brief them about what we're doing. How are we doing for time? So the thing to remember, as XKCD sums it up, we think of all of the effort of hacking into buildings and picking locks and all of that stuff. The easiest way to get access to a system is just ask for it. Email someone. Oh yeah, I've forgotten my password. Can you reset it? How do you authenticate that email? How do you authenticate that message on Slack? It used to be that we could trust a phone call. You could trust a Teams call. But the reality is that is no longer possible. With deep fakes, we saw that with a bank in Hong Kong, that it is possible for someone to make a video or a phone call that you just cannot tell is fake. So we have to do it in person. I really hope my colleague in Algeria does not forget his password, because that's going to be expensive. That is actually my colleague's laptop. Now, he has assured me that that is not actually his password. He did that just to wind me up. Yes. But I've used this photo. So all of the photos and less credited are ones that I've taken. I use this just to illustrate the point. There are a lot of people who, you're laughing at the idea of writing passwords down. The reality is, though, actually, we do need to write passwords down because we've got so many of them. But we call it password managers. But you also need to remember the master password. And people other than you might need it. In the management safe in my office, there is a tamper-evident bag, and it is labeled only to be opened in the event of Julia's death. And it has the password to the backup of my laptop. Writing passwords down is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm going to skip over the key management one. So, I talked about getting physical access. We all think about the nice lock that you've got on the server room door, and all of that sort of stuff. I have a whole archive of videos from my colleagues of where they've walked in half the time to an unlocked server room or an unlocked network cabinet. That one's a really common one. But even where it is locked, you would be amazed at how simple it is to bypass them. So some of you may have noticed that I'm walking around with lockpicks on my earrings. That's partly because it's a really easy way of getting them into a building. But the reality is, if you are down to the idea of picking a lock, you're not the lock-picking lawyer. You're not going to get in. And whilst most of my colleagues can do it, it's not an attack you need to do. Because the reality is, even though you've spent 200, 300 euros on a fancy lock, this is a sheet of plastic that my colleague carries around with them. AliExpress, €2.50 for a pack of 3 delivered in about 10 days. And it just detects, you can push it through the lock and you get access. And the great thing about this is it doesn't set off metal detectors, so you can take it on flights. My other colleague prefers this. Again, €4 from AliExpress. And it's more effective, it's easier to use. The problem is it sets off the metal detector and people start asking questions. But the plastic, oh, if you get stopped, why are you carrying this around? Oh, it was litter, I picked it up. It is amazing how easy it is to get physical access. And once you have physical access, all bets are off. Who here actually locks their server room? Okay, there are a lot of you that do not have your hand up there. Far too many of you. So, when it comes to the software stack, I have quite a rant about Docker, but unfortunately, I only have 7 minutes left, not 7 hours. But one of the problems that a lot of us have, we learned this from SolarWinds, is we do not know what is installed on our machines. If I was to point at a machine that you have deployed and ask, what version of OpenSSL are you running? People will look at you blankly. This came up with, this is a request from one of my colleagues. He had managed to get access to a restricted bash shell on a machine. And restricted bash, you don't have mkdir, you don't have touch, you can't really write anything. You've got a lot of restrictions in what you can do. But he realized that because of the way this system was set up, if he could create a directory and he could put a file in it, that file would be executed automatically. So he came to me as the local Linux nerd. How can I create a directory when I don't have any of the standard tools? Anyone want to guess what technique you can use for this? No, it's wget. Believe it or not, wget, the tool that we use to download stuff onto our machines, can create a directory if you tell it to. And people just leave them installed. They've got rid of all of the other things, but they forget about having a simple tool like wget around that bypasses their security. This is something you need to think about in your threat models. I know that on my router, I have TCP dump, I have nmap. These are tools that if someone gets access to that machine, they can use to get round my network. But I have to balance the risk between, do I want to have to install these every time, potentially when I don't have a network connection to do it with, versus what is the risk of somebody getting in and abusing that connection. The other thing you have to remember with all of this is you have to act in on the basis that it is not a question of if you will be hacked, it is a question of when. Hands up if you have a disaster recovery plan. Okay, maybe 10% of you. Hands up if you've tested it. Thank you, both of you. Hands up if your test was anything other than a disaster. A friend of mine used to work for a company whose name might be at the start of the alphabet. And they run into the issue of how do you cold start the organization if, for some reason, everything gets switched off or if everything is hacked? Hands up if you've got a backup. Hands up if you've tested your backup. Hands up if you have an off-site backup. Offline backup? Okay, so that's less than a dozen. Remember, blessed are the paranoid, for they test their backups. My first job as a spotty little 17-year-old, as an apprentice, one of it was literally to change the backup tapes. And one day we got a restore request. And we went to last night's backup and it was blank. So they said, can you go to the local fire safe and get this week, all of this week's out? And they were blank. So they sent me down to the loading dock to where there was another fire safe where we kept the last year's worth. And they were blank. Because we'd done the backup and it was saying, backup is done. But we'd never verified that it was actually doing it. You need to have a disaster recovery plan. You need to know what that plan is. You need to test it. You need to make sure you've got an offline backup so that if you are hit with ransomware, you can restore. There are a number of ransomware attacks where they wait. They waited 3 months before they actually activated. And the result was that whilst the organization had 3 months of backups, they had 3 months backup of the encrypted ransomware files. They couldn't do the restore. So, assume that it's going to happen and plan accordingly. I wanted a slightly different quote to the usual one that I use about being paranoid enough. Yeah, it's hard not to be paranoid when you see all of the situations where people screw up and you think, could have told you so on that one. Facebook dumped all of their GPG routes and didn't have access to their out-of-band network because it was connected to the same network as everything else. We're all sat here thinking, yeah, just have an out-of-band network. They all had it all together, and so they couldn't get into their building because their building was connected to the same system that their network was on. So we've got 2-3 minutes. Any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I don't have a question as such, but I do have a piece of trivia that you can take along with you for your further presentations. In Denmark, I'm Mirza. I'm from the Union for IT Professionals in Denmark. In Denmark, we have a different error code for PEPCAG, and it's called error 40 because the error exists 40 centimeters from the screen.
Nice.
I'm Thomas. I don't work in networking. I play with computers for fun. And I think, do you think it's accurate that you've been using the word paranoid because it sounds like you have an accurate perception of risk rather than an inaccurate perception of risk?
You're not paranoid if they really are out to get you.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Paranoid is just an optimist with experience.
Yeah. Any last questions? Give you a big round of applause. Chocolates.